This is Tom Ray at 26B Nelson Street in North Grafton, Massachusetts, on 21 October 2022, interviewing Jim Scott. I'd like to ask you about the genesis of the Micromoog. Jim, would you explain how that came about?
Yeah, this would be in early 1974, and I had the idea of an entry-level synthesizer, sort of a little brother to the Micromoog, as a low-cost instrument. And I was the person who came up with the idea, proposed it, prototyped, designed it, prototyped it, and saw it into production. So pretty much it was a one-man job. I've seen on the internet, on websites, that the Micromoog was designed by Jim Scott and Robert Moog, but that's not true. If any person was a collaborator, a co-designer, it would be Tom Ray, who just introduced me, who was a collaborator and had a lot of suggestions and ideas that were incorporated into this basic scheme. So in early '74, I did this in a fashion similar to the way Bill Hemsath did the Minimoog, where Bill just built one and presented it. And that was the beginning of the Minimoog, the A model, on his own time, without telling anybody what he was doing. So it saves an awful lot of meetings and discussions and compromises. And if the saying is, a camel's a horse designed by a committee. So I wanted to avoid that. So I basically laid out the control panel, knew how it worked, and designed all the circuitry on a proto board, that is, little boards that you plug in the parts without soldering, and got the basic circuitry working. Then I proposed the idea. At the time, the upper management of the company was the executives at Norland Music, so they were the ones to give approval on projects. So I pitched the idea in a meeting verbally, and I wanted to avoid a lot of memos and writing up proposals and writing up specifications and all that kind of stuff, and try to explain to people what I had in mind. So I suggested that rather than go through all that process, why didn't I just build a prototype, and that would be my proposal. Here it is on the table. We can play it and see where you want to take it from there. And I got this, well, how long is it going to take you to do that? I said, 2 weeks. And I'm pretty sure they thought I was bullshitting, but I wasn't. Because I had all the parts at hand. I collected all the parts to build the prototypes, in my office or in my desk. So 2 weeks later, I had the first prototype of the Micromoog on my lap. Flew to Chicago to meet with the brass at Norland to present it, the idea, and to pass judgment on it. They brought in Roger Powell, who at the time was a clinician for the Moog Company. So Roger, who first time he'd seen it, manipulated the controls and listened to the sound and pronounced that, yeah, this is a good instrument, except one thing: get rid of that damn keyboard. It's a low-cost machine. I had prototyped it with typewriter keys instead of regular piano keys built into it, and so that of course was incorporated, a real Pratt and Reed piano-style keyboard. Then over the next 9 months, I prototyped it, and by January of the next year, that'd be about 9 months later, the serial number 10001 was done, and Robert Moog had played that one, or maybe a predecessor to it, and pronounced that it was, it was all right, all good. Robert Moog had a circuit suggestion or two, and Ben Luce had a circuit improvement or two.
David Luce.
I'm sorry, David Luce. But mainly it was just all my work. So that went into production, and then Tom then was responsible for getting it marketed.
Do you want to outline what David Luce's and Bob Moog's uh, ideas were for small changes in the instrument?
The Micromoog used a novel at the time exponential generator. I should tell you, an exponential generator is the analog circuits like an analog computer element that produces the equally different scale from a keyboard. The keyboards produce typically 1 volt per octave or 83 millivolts per semitone, and then that has to be converted to an exponentially rising scale so that the pitch doubles every octave. And that's the kind of the heart of an analog synthesizer, is getting that accurate. And I designed a novel exponentiator where I used an array of transistors, 5 transistors in a package, so they were all inherently exactly matched. And then used that topology, in fact, is a thermometer if you connect it upright. So, and you could use one of the transistors as a heater. So I ended up with a heated chip that was extremely stable. I designed it for 55 degrees centigrade. I wanted to keep it as cool as possible. But at 55 centigrade, it would still regulate in 130 degrees, so this thing would stay in tune in the concert in the Sahara. And that transistor array had a spare transistor, so that made the oscillator very accurate. David Luce, one of the things that problems that exponential generators have is they inherently go a little flat to high into the range. That's up in the high treble range. And Luce had an idea for compensating that. It was different than the past, and that worked extremely well. So I incorporated Luce's high-end compensation in the oscillator. The consequence of using that exponentiator, the 5 transistor exponentiator, was I had a spare transistor as a current source for whatever, as an exponential current source. So I used that to drive the voltage-controlled filter. And voltage-controlled filters are designed so if every generation has feedback to peak up the output near the cutoff point, and you can peak it up so high that it will break into self-oscillation and act as a tone source. And that was a feature that was put into Moog synthesizers in about 1970. In Moog modular systems in Trumansburg it was done. So I did that. I used the exponential current source, the spare exponential current source in that transistor array to have a very accurate drive to the filter. So when you broke it into oscillation, it would be accurately in tune. Except it wasn't, because for some reason it was not being well in tune at all. And David Luce pointed out that my buffer amp between the sound goes through a voltage control filter, then should be processed. What's that? And then it goes through a voltage control amplifier to control the articulation of the note. And the buffer amp that I put in between, I tried to go low cost, and it was not a good enough quality. So Luce again suggested that I put a field effect transistor buffer in, so that the intervening amplifier between the VCF and the VCA didn't load down the filter chain. At which point, using the voltage control filter as a tone source became very accurate. So those are two things that David Luce did. I was having some trouble too stabilizing the circuitry that regulated the temperature in the exponentiator. And Robert Moog, I forget exactly what it was, but he had a suggestion for how to compensate that circuit so it wouldn't go into destructive or wild oscillation and ruin everything. So Moog's contribution was into to get that self-heated chip circuit to work. Moog and John Beers previously had tried to do that same thing with the Lyra synthesizer, which is a synthesizer I think only one has ever built. supposed to be a replacement for the Minimoog, I believe. And they couldn't get it to work. And I asked John Beers many years later what was wrong, and it appears that it made a matter. It was important to which transistor in that chip you used, something like that. And so I had inadvertently done it the right way, accidentally, and so mine worked. It wasn't much different than the one Moog and Moose and Beers were trying to do, but it worked just fine. It could be also a difference. We don't know for sure. It could be a difference in manufacturer or some detail of the implementation of the circuitry. But in any case, I knew about that they had done tried to do a heated chip in that machine at some point. But I basically came up with the idea independently on my own and got it to work.
I'd like to ask you about the physical package of the Micromoog a little bit. You remember, you could look at the back of the Micromoog and look at it from two different angles. In other words, standing on its nose or straight from the back, and still see the legends for what the jacks were back there. Do you recall?
Yes. First of all, credit Tony Marchese, our engineering manager, chief engineer, I should say, for designing the package. It was very rugged. Tom used to give a demo of the Micromoog, saying that not only do we stand behind our instruments, we stand on them. And he was standing on an inverted Micromoog, using it as a podium. So that was a pretty good idea. Give you an idea of the ruggedness that was built into it.
And the reason I could do that is because all the controls on the Micromoog were recessed. ARP had something I called it the bucktooth keyboard. They had the keys on the keyboard sticking out. If it fell off of a stand, it would shatter to pieces. And literally, you could stand on them. You could turn the Micromoog on its face, and it wouldn't hurt any of the controls. So yes, indeed, I did use that as a podium. And not only do we stand behind our instruments, but you can stand on them, as Jim has said.
Yeah, so none of the knobs and none of the keys could be smashed by dropping it on its face because they were recessed. It was also the angle on the very front of the instrument, beneath the keyboard, was set such that the Micromoog could balance on its nose. That was done deliberately. I designed the Micromoog to be extremely serviceable. I had it in mind that it could last pretty much forever, and so I designed it with that in mind. So I designed the cabling so you could get it all apart on the bench easily. It disassembled easily, and then there's a lot of analog synthesizers like that. There's a lot of trim pots with variable resistors, little internal knobs that screwdriver adjustment knobs that tweak it up so it works properly. And all the ones for tuning it up, I put on the back, access to the back, so they're all lined up in a row, little screwdriver holes across the back of the Micromoog. And I only put controls out there that a musician using ears and nothing else, and maybe I set maybe a tone source like a A440 or something for an organ or something. But using only the performer's ears could completely tune it up. Not that it was needed that very often, because it was extremely stable with that exponential generator, to the point that I think Tom said we were accused of putting a digital correction circuit in it, but we didn't. It was just straight out analog circuit. So all the user accessible ones are on the back and very easy. And I also designed a circuitry so that controls tunings didn't interact. So if I adjusted the high end, it didn't throw the scale up. I adjusted the scale and it didn't transpose the keyboard, all that kind of stuff. So it was specifically designed by just making the right decisions during circuit design that those controls interacted not at all or only slightly, so you could tune it up easily.
So you might say it was the most user-friendly instrument that Moog certainly had done to date.
I guess so. And then all the ones that you really need is know what you're doing. You need to be a technician with test equipment, oscilloscopes, and all that kind of stuff, voltmeters, all the critical stuff like setting the temperature on the exponential generator, which was straightforward, but it required paying attention to what you were doing. All that stuff was inside, so you had to take the machine apart to get at those controls. I also wrote the service manual for the Micromoog. First time I ever wrote anything, it led to a change in careers when I got out of electronic music, where for quite a few years I worked as a technical writer, a manual writer. And in the manual, it very specifically admonishes people that don't know what they're doing. I didn't put it that way. To just lay off and don't mess with the control, all the trim pots inside. Only use the ones on the outside. That's all you ever need. I've heard since that from what's his name, Jared
Lackey.
Jared Lackey. They come back in when he gets them back in to tune up, and all those adjustments inside have been screwed with and messed up. So people don't have the man. Usually throw it away when they're unpacking it or something, or they disregarded it. And so Lackey wanted to know how to tune those things up. It turned out a tuning procedure wasn't out in the field. And I found in my logbooks the original tuning procedure for the Micromoog. It's in my handwriting. And I copied it off and sent it to him. Oh, no, I didn't find it in my logbooks. I take that back. Tim Wernick found it. Had a handwritten copy of the tuning procedure.
Wow.
In my handwriting from 1975. And I copied that off and gave a copy to Jared.
Jareth, yeah.
Jared.
All right.